I created this worksheet to help you figure out how to add and subtract integers. And when I say adding and subtracting integers, it's for problems like this. So 36 plus negative 42, negative 35 plus negative 36, negative 38 minus 34, and negative 12 minus negative 4. So let me show you how I use it. So again, if I broke it down to several steps, so you can see here we have step 1, rewrite as addition. So if you look at the problem, if it's not written as addition, you want to change it to addition first, but that's already written as addition, so I can skip step 1. Step 2 says, are they opposites? So opposites meaning, one's positive, one's negative. So when I look at this, these are opposites because that's a positive number and this is a negative number. And just to point out, the reason why I have you write it as addition is because it'll actually help you, make it more obvious, so you'll help you see if they're opposites. So again, this is a negative, that's a positive, therefore they're opposites. So I go down this route. Yes, they're opposites, so the goal is you got to subtract the numbers. So now I do my calculation off to the side, so I'll do 42 and 36, and I'm going to subtract them. And when I subtract this, I will get 6. And then you can see here it says subtracted. Do you have more positives or more negatives? And in this case, I can see that I have more negatives. And since I have more negatives, then my answer will be negative. So then I'll put my answer as 6, and it's a negative 6 because, again, I have more negatives than positives. And as a little side note, I always like to tell my students, the reason why we subtract when we have opposites is because there's something called a zero pair, meaning one is positive, one is negative. In that case, they will always cancel each other out. So if I'm combining, let's say, 3 positives with 4 negatives, you can see here that these 3 pairs of zero pairs cancel out, and I'm left with a negative extra. So whatever you have more of would always be left over after you cancel out all the opposites. So that's why we always keep the sign of what you have more of. So again, if you can see here, if I have 36 positives, 42 negatives, 36 of these positive will cancel out 36 of these negatives, and you'll see I have 6 negatives left over. And then I go to the next problem. So you can see here it's already written as addition, so that's step 1. And I can see this is a negative 35 and a negative 36. So they are not opposites, so I'll go down this route, and it says add the numbers and keep the sign of both numbers. So now I'm going to take the 2 numbers, 35 and 36, and I'm going to add them. And when I add them, I get 71. And then since I'm adding negatives with negatives, my answer will be a negative. So that's what I mean by keep the sign of both numbers. And as a little side note, as I mentioned before, let me put it here. If I have negative numbers and I add more negatives, you can see there are no zero pairs. You just end up with a whole bunch of negatives altogether, and that's why we end up adding in the case when the signs are the same. All right, here's my next example. So you can see here, this is not written as addition. So again, step 1 is to rewrite it as addition. So in this case, if something is written as subtraction, I could rewrite it as negative 38 plus negative 34. So when you subtract, that's the same thing as adding a negative. And now you can see this became similar to the previous problem where we have a negative plus a negative. So negatives plus negatives, you're just going to end up with more negatives. So we just got to end up adding 38 and 34. And then you can see here I get 72. And since I combine negatives with negatives, my final answer will be negative 72. So again, these are the same signs, right? So they are not opposites because they're the same. And since they're not opposites, we add the numbers and keep the sign of both numbers. And then for my last example, we have a problem that's not written as addition. So I'm going to rewrite it. And keep in mind, if you're subtracting a negative like we have here, this is going to become negative 12 minus a negative is the same thing as addition. So that's going to be negative 12 plus 4. And now I can see that this is a negative 12 and a positive 4. These are opposites. So again, step 2 says, are they opposites? Yes, they are. So I'm going to subtract the numbers. So we get 12 minus 4. And we get 8 here. So 8. And then the last question, do you have more positives or negatives? And since in this case, I had 12 negatives and 4 positives, then that means that I have more negatives. So my answer will be a negative 8. And that's it. So again, this is pretty much just a graphic organizer to help you with your thinking process. When you're doing these problems, change to addition, check if they're opposites. If they are opposites, we got to subtract in that case. And then you check in your answer, if you have more positives, your answer will be positive. If you have more negatives, your answer will be negative. And then if they're not opposites, meaning they're both negative numbers you're adding, or they're both positive numbers that you're adding, all you gotta do is combine the numbers, right? Add them up, and then you keep the sign of both numbers.